the name Fatty Arbuckle is synonymous with the St. Francis Hotel, the party, the Labor Day weekend, and the rape and murder of Virginia Rappe.
Virginia Rappe died on September 9, 1921. 4 days earlier, she walked into a hotel party in San Francisco. By the end of that weekend, her organs were removed in an illegal autopsy. The evidence was destroyed. The woman who accused Arbuckle had already sent telegrams about making money from the scandal. The district attorney knew his star witness was a con artist. He used her anyway. 3 trials exposed lies, threats, and a cover-up that reached deeper than anyone expected. But the real story wasn't about what Arbuckle did. It was about what someone else was hiding. In 1920, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle reached a level of success that almost no one talks about anymore. He became the first actor in film history to sign a contract worth $1,000 per year with Paramount Pictures. A figure so large, it barely made sense at the time and would equal about $15,000 to $700,000 today. This did not come out of nowhere. Just 2 years earlier, in 1918, Paramount had already guaranteed him $3,000 over 3 years, which translates to roughly $63,000 today. Between 1919 and 1921, he was arguably the biggest star in Hollywood, even as Charlie Chaplin's dominance began to slip. His films packed theaters across the country, and only months before everything collapsed, his movie Crazy to Marry was still playing nationwide, while he signed yet another $1 million deal. Years earlier, back in 1914, Paramount had made a shocking offer that no comedian had ever received before. They paid him $1,000 per day, gave him 25% of all profits, and granted him full artistic control. That kind of earning power made him the wealthiest comedian Hollywood had ever seen up to that point. A man so valuable that the industry reshaped itself around him. But hidden inside that success was something darker. One of the clauses in his 1920 contract demanded that he keep his weight above 250 pounds. It went further than that. He would receive bonuses if he added another 50 or even 100 pounds. His body was no longer his own. Born in 1887, weighing an astonishing 16 pounds, his size had always followed him. But now it became a legal requirement. He complied because that was how Hollywood worked. By 1916, the strain was already destroying him. By the time of the scandal, he weighed around 266 pounds and often hovered near 300. Heavy drinking and constant overeating took their toll, turning his health into something executives exploited for laughs and profit. The studio was paying him to slowly ruin himself, locking his fatty image into a contract he could never escape. When everything finally collapsed, the speed of it was brutal. On April 12, 1922, after 3 trials, the jury deliberated for only 6 minutes before acquitting him. They went further and issued a written apology, stating that acquittal was not enough and that he was entirely innocent and free from all blame. It should have ended there. Instead, days later, Will Hays of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America banned Arbuckle from appearing in films, making him the first actor ever blacklisted. Copies of his movies were destroyed. The trials left him with $700,000 in legal bills, which equals roughly $2,500,000 today, along with tax problems that pushed him into bankruptcy. He sold his house, he sold his cars. On June 29, 1933, Warner Brothers finally offered him a feature film contract for a comeback. He reportedly said it was the best day of his life. That same night, he died of a heart attack at age 46, completely broke. Buster Keaton later said his friend died of a broken heart. Long before the scandal, his body had already begun failing him. In 1916, he developed a severe infection on his leg that turned into a massive carbuncle, a painful cluster of boils that nearly cost him the limb. doctors seriously considered amputation. To manage the pain, they prescribed morphine, and he became addicted. During recovery, he lost about 80 pounds, bringing his weight down to 266, but the damage had been done. Alcohol became another crutch. Years later, prosecutors would point to his morphine use and label him a drug addict, twisting medical treatment into moral failure. His final years were filled with depression and declining health, the same industry that forced him to destroy his body, quietly turning its back on him. Before all of that, Arbuckle had shaped comedy itself. In 1917, he discovered and mentored Buster Keaton, pulling him from vaudeville into movies. Together they made 14 films and built one of the most important partnerships in film history. After Arbuckle was erased from Hollywood, friends like Keaton and Charlie Chaplin helped him find work directing, but only under a false name. Keaton joked that he should call himself Will Be Good. Arbuckle settled on William Goodrich, using his father's name. The joke lingered anyway. Will Be Good Rich became a cruel promise that he would behave and maybe be forgiven. For more than a decade, he directed low-budget films under that name, a constant reminder that innocence did not equal forgiveness. On September 3, 1921, Arbuckle left Los Angeles for what should have been a simple vacation. At the time, he was earning about $3,000 per year and traveled in a custom purple Pierce Arrow Model 66 designed by Harley Earl. The car stood nearly 7 feet tall at the windshield and housed an 825 cubic inch engine, the largest of its era. With him were Lowell Sherman and Fred Fishback. They checked into 3 connected suites at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, rooms 1219, 1220, and 1221, creating a private compound at the top of the building. Prohibition had been federal law since January 1919, but that meant little to Hollywood stars. They brought bootleg liquor with them and bought more from speakeasies near Union Square. Gin and orange wine flowed freely. The party began around noon on Labor Day, September 5, 1921, centered in room 1220, which had no beds and was used as a lounge. Guests came and went as the afternoon wore on, including Virginia Rappe, who arrived around noon. What almost no one mentioned at first was that Arbuckle was already injured. He was suffering from painful second-degree burns on both buttocks from a recent film accident. The injury was serious enough that it nearly ended the trip early. Whether it came from a hot stove or a chemical-soaked rag, the pain was real. At 34, he was struggling to sit or move comfortably, and likely relied on alcohol and morphine for relief. This detail would later be ignored as accusations grew more dramatic. The guest list itself was chaotic. Showgirls Zay Prevon and Alice Blake were invited for glamour. The most dangerous presence was Maud Delmont, also known as Madame Black, a woman with a long criminal record for fraud, extortion, and bigamy. She specialized in luring wealthy men into compromising situations and then blackmailing them. After Virginia Rappe's death, Delmont sent a telegram stating, "We have Roscoe Arbuckle in a hole here. Chance to make some money out of him." Her credibility was so damaged that prosecutors refused to let her testify at trial, even though she drove the accusations. Small moments became weapons. An assistant manager testified that Arbuckle was seen wearing Virginia's Panama hat, tilted playfully on his head. Newspapers turned that into evidence of cruelty, ignoring that costume play was common party behavior and part of Arbuckle's comedy. Chaos had already taken over the afternoon. Virginia Rappe's own story was tragic long before that weekend. Born July 7, 1895, possibly earlier, she grew up with confusion around her parentage and lost her mother at age 11. By 14, she supported herself as a model and earned around $4,000 per year, a small fortune at the time. She became known as a bold fashion designer and pacifist, creating statement clothing like her peace hat and advocating for women's clothing equality. She posed in tuxedos, demanded equal dress rights, and lived freely at a time when that was dangerous. By 1921, her career was faltering and her health was fragile. She suffered from chronic cystitis and had been in pain for 6 weeks before the party. Nurse testimony later revealed she repeatedly asked what could have broken inside her. She collapsed at the party and died on September 9, 1921, just 4 days after arriving in San Francisco. Her death certificate listed her length of residence as 4 days. Her birthplace and parents were recorded as no record. During the autopsy, key organs were removed and destroyed, ensuring no future examination. Dr. Melville Rumwell walked into room 1227 on September 5, 1921, thinking he was dealing with nothing more serious than acute alcoholism, and that single mistake led Virginia straight into 3 full days of suffering that should never have happened. He barely examined her, partly because he was close to Maud Delmont, who called him Rummy, and partly because he cared more about protecting his own social standing than treating a dying woman. The strange part was that another doctor, Arthur Beardsley, had catheterized Virginia on September 6th and seen blood in her urine, a clear sign of internal bleeding, yet he never reported it. The silence between the two doctors created a deadly gap, and by the time Rumwell realized his diagnosis was wrong, the damage inside her body had already become unstoppable. The moment he stepped back, her chances of living were slipping toward zero with every hour. Maud Delmont made everything even worse because she refused to let Virginia go to a hospital when she needed emergency surgery most. Beardsley had already warned them that she might have a ruptured bladder and said she had to be taken to a public hospital right away, but Delmont blocked it. She cared more about the possibility that reporters might see Virginia in a public ward than the fact that her friend was dying. She feared that if Arbuckle or Henry Lehrman saw headlines, they would refuse to pay the medical bills, and Delmont had no money at all. She was drinking in room 12 or 20 while pretending to manage the situation, acting like a gatekeeper who had the right to decide whether Virginia lived or died. Each hour that passed under her control erased the slim hope that emergency treatment could save Virginia. On September 7, 1921, 2 days before Virginia died, Delmont showed her real intentions. She sent telegrams to friends in San Diego and Los Angeles, proudly announcing that they had Roscoe Arbuckle in a hole and that it was a chance to make some money out of him. Virginia was lying in the Wakefield Sanitarium at that exact moment, trying to stay alive while her closest companion was plotting extortion. When District Attorney Matthew Brady first filed charges on September 12th, he had no idea these telegrams existed. Once investigators found them, Delmont's credibility collapsed. The case became even stranger when Arbuckle's lawyer revealed that Henry Lehrman had been involved with both Virginia and Delmont, and that the two of them had been working together to squeeze money out of Arbuckle long before Virginia took her last breath. Virginia finally reached Wakefield Sanitarium at 1065 Sutter Street on September 7th, a private hospital with 40 beds and a reputation built on serving wealthy patients who needed privacy. Rumors later tried to paint it as an abortion clinic, but the truth was different. Wakefield specialized in obstetrics, high-risk births, and surgical cases, and it admitted men, women, and children. It had 2 operating rooms, and its staff included doctors trained at Stanford University. Rumwell chose Wakefield because it offered secrecy that public hospitals could never guarantee. Reporters often waited in public wards to spot new scandals, and Wakefield protected its patients from that kind of exposure. Privacy mattered for everyone involved, but in Virginia's case, the quiet halls only hid how quickly she was slipping away. Nurse Vera Cumberland arrived at 7 p.m. on September 8th to take over care from Nurse Jameson. But everything about her behavior sent the case spinning in a bizarre direction. She told people she was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria, and Rumwell believed her. Early into her shift, she confronted him, claiming the case had been mishandled terribly because she had visions of juries, policemen, investigators, and judges gathering around it. Her final declaration was even stranger. She announced that the name Cumberland should not be dragged into the filth of actors' misdoings, and she walked out, abandoning the patient she was supposed to protect. For reasons no one could explain, she was never asked to testify in any of the 3 trials, even though she had watched Virginia deteriorate during crucial hours. During those same hours, Sidney Spreckles, part of the famous Sugar family, visited Virginia out of pure sympathy. She claimed she barely knew Virginia, only through Lehrman. Yet something pulled her to the bedside of a woman dying with only Delmont in the room. Virginia whispered that she had lived a quiet life and never imagined she would end up in a party like the one that led to her collapse. Sidney promised to keep Lehrman updated and wrote down Delmont's messages, mostly desperate requests for money as hospital bills grew higher. When Virginia died, neither Arbuckle nor Al Semnacher had arranged any payments, leaving Delmont facing everything alone. Virginia's death came at exactly 1 p.m. on Friday, September 9, 1921. Peritonitis from a ruptured bladder ended everything, 4 days after the Labor Day party began. The autopsy performed by Dr. Ophuls revealed a bladder that was unusually small, badly inflamed, and torn with a tiny hole on the outside and a long 3/4-inch split on the inside. Rumwell had initially resisted the idea of an autopsy and claimed her death was natural, but the bruises across her body and the suspicious damage inside her abdomen made it impossible to ignore that something violent had happened. Delmont and Spreckles demanded answers, and once the truth of the internal injuries came out, the case exploded into a storm of accusations and doubt. Everything grew even more chaotic when Delmont and District Attorney Brady pressed Rumwell for an immediate autopsy on the evening of September 9th at 7 p.m., even though it was illegal without the approval of Coroner Thomas Leland, who was away on Naval Reserve duty. Delmont threatened the doctor and the hospital, warning that she could ruin them if he refused. Rumwell knew that Wakefield carried quiet rumors of illicit abortion procedures, and he feared that police scrutiny would destroy his career. Under pressure from Delmont and Brady, he began to panic. That panic pushed Rumwell into a desperate decision. He arranged for an illegal autopsy and then called Dr. William Ophuls, the Stanford dean and one of the most respected pathologists in California. Bringing in someone so powerful meant Rumwell could later blame the entire process on a respected authority figure if anyone questioned him. He planned it so that he wouldn't have to take part directly. If Ophuls handled everything and signed off on the findings, Rumwell could survive whatever happened next. Ophuls arrived at Wakefield late that night. Nurses Grace Halston and Margaret Fort moved Virginia's body onto the chilled iron autopsy table. But Forte left shortly after, leaving Halston alone to assist, even though she was only a trainee. Under bright surgical lights, Ophuls began the incision beneath the sternum. Every movement in that room pushed the mystery deeper, because what they found inside was far worse than anything they expected. The moment he opened her abdomen, fluid spilled out everywhere. Then came the overpowering smell of a massive pus-filled infection that had been spreading for days. Her entire peritoneum was inflamed, and the bladder was clearly the source of the rupture that caused the deadly peritonitis. The organ looked small, swollen, and raw under the lights. Even Rumwell and Halston stared at it in stunned silence. Everything pointed back to the missed diagnosis and the long delay in treatment. When Ophuls examined the bladder more closely, he discovered the clean breaks, a 1/8-inch hole in the outer wall and a matching 3/4-inch tear inside. Medical experts later said the tear could have come from crushing pressure, from a damaged bladder failing after cystitis, or from an instrument during a botched abortion. No one could determine which was correct because there were too many unanswered questions about the days leading up to the party and too many secrets surrounding Wakefield's reputation. As the autopsy continued, the bruises across Virginia's body became further evidence that something violent had happened. The bruises along her arm looked like finger marks. Others covered her torso, her thighs, and her shins. Dr. Strange later testified about these injuries on September 23, 1921. Ophuls agreed the bruises were real, but couldn't determine if they came from an assault or from medical staff restraining her while she screamed in pain. The marks were there, but the meaning behind them stayed trapped in uncertainty. The most shocking moment came after the internal examination. Virginia's uterus, ovaries, fallopian tubes, rectum, and bladder were removed and placed in jars, but those specimens disappeared soon after. They were destroyed without explanation, eliminating forever the chance to prove whether she had been pregnant or whether an abortion had taken place before the party. Because the autopsy was illegal, no chain of custody existed, and no one could be held accountable. If modern DNA testing had been possible, the entire truth might have surfaced, but every bit of biological evidence had been erased. When the body was finally sewn shut, Ophuls abandoned his usual skilled technique and used rough stitches that looked like a line of large X shapes running from her breastbone to her pelvis. Cotton batting filled the empty cavities where organs had been removed. Everything about the closure looked rushed, careless, and meant only to get the body out of Wakefield as fast as possible. When Halstead and company arrived to take her away, the damage already done to the truth was permanent. All of this unfolded while Maud Bambina Delmont carried a past hidden behind her many names. She had married John Hopper in 1912 and then secretly married Cassius Wood without divorcing Hopper, leading to bigamy charges. On December 18, 1921, right in the middle of the first Arbuckle trial, she stood in a Fresno courtroom and pleaded guilty. While presenting herself as a champion of justice, she was actually facing a year of probation for marrying two men at the same time. Her background revealed even darker patterns. Delmont had been running scams for years, using seduction, staged affairs, and false testimony to extort money from married men. She would lure them into compromising situations, photograph them, and then demand payment to keep the pictures hidden. In the 1920s, a single scandal could destroy a man's entire career, so her targets often paid large sums rather than risk exposure. Her criminal history stretched through several states, always involving fraud or extortion. She had also tried to use these tactics on a man named Earl Lynn of Los Angeles, threatening to accuse him of improper conduct unless he paid her. Defense attorney Frank Dominguez exposed this during the preliminary hearing on September 27, 1921, proving that Delmont had used the same manipulative approach long before the Arbuckle case. The conspiracy grew wider when Dominguez uncovered a plot involving Al Semnacher. He claimed Semnacher and Delmont planned to steal Virginia's torn clothing, take it to Los Angeles, and use it in a blackmail scheme against Arbuckle. Semnacher insisted he had only taken silk pieces to clean his car and tease Virginia. But the explanation felt suspicious when placed against Delmont's long history of criminal schemes. The defense then presented the most stunning piece of evidence against Delmont. She had written a letter directly to Arbuckle offering to stay silent if he paid her. The telegrams she sent on September 7th, saying they had Arbuckle in a hole, made it even clearer. Everything pointed to money. Virginia's death had become an opportunity for profit. Matthew Brady, the district attorney, faced a problem he couldn't fix. Delmont was the only person claiming to have witnessed an assault, yet he refused to put her on the stand during all 3 trials because he knew she would fall apart under questioning. On January 21, 1922, he even admitted publicly that she was unreliable and that someone's freedom couldn't depend on her testimony. Still, he kept her close during the first 2 trials, as if hoping she might become useful. Her story changed constantly, shifting with every retelling. At first, she claimed she saw Arbuckle drag Virginia into a room. Then she admitted she wasn't sure. She claimed the door was locked, then later said she never protested out loud. Every version contradicted the last, and even Dr. Leland had to stop her during the inquest to remind her how serious it was to give sworn testimony. The prosecution needed her, but they couldn't risk putting her in front of a jury because her shifting words would have destroyed the entire case. The first trial opened on November 14, 1921, and from the moment the jurors walked into the room, the entire case began to tilt in one impossible direction. One juror named Helen Hubbard made sure of it. She told the others she would vote guilty until hell froze over, and she shut herself off from every word of testimony that followed. She would not read transcripts. She would not look at evidence. She would not even talk to the other jurors. People later said she covered her ears with her fingers whenever Arbuckle's defense tried to speak. Her husband worked closely with District Attorney Brady's office, something that should have disqualified her long before she ever sat on that jury. Still, she stayed, and the rest of the jurors pushed back as best they could, voting for acquittal right from the start. Only one juror joined Hubbard on the guilty side. The vote stood at 10-2 for acquittal, yet the case refused to die because Brady refused to let it go. Brady was climbing toward the California governor's office, and he saw the Arbuckle trial as the perfect stage to elevate his name. People in the courtroom described him as proud, sharp-tempered, and eager for a spotlight. He told the press he already had evidence that proved Arbuckle guilty beyond any reasonable doubt, long before he ever had a case built. Even when he learned that many of the newspaper reports were lies, he kept going because turning back would have ruined his path to higher office. He even pushed for a second autopsy when the first one gave him nothing he could use. At that point, it stopped being a search for truth. It became a political performance dressed up as justice. The second trial began on January 11, 1922, and lasted until February 3rd. This time, the defense leaned heavily on testimony about Virginia Rappe's medical issues and her tendency to remove her clothes when she drank. And they also broke down the claim about Arbuckle's fingerprints on the hotel room door. They seemed certain they were headed toward a clean acquittal, so certain that they made a choice that would cost them everything. They did not put Arbuckle on the stand, and Gavin McNabb, their lead attorney, did not even deliver a closing argument. Some jurors waited for Arbuckle to speak, and when he stayed silent, they decided he must be hiding something. The jury struggled for more than 40 hours over 5 days before the vote flipped completely. It ended with 10 votes for conviction and only 2 for acquittal. It was the reverse of the first trial, and a harsh lesson in how much a jury needs to hear a man defend himself. When the third trial opened on March 13, 1922, the defense walked in prepared. They understood every mistake they had made, and they carried nearly 5 weeks of testimony behind them by the time the trial closed on April 12th. Around 70 witnesses appeared, and many of them delivered the most damaging blow the prosecution had faced. Several admitted under oath that Brady had threatened them if they refused to speak against Arbuckle. The defense also showed powerful evidence that Rappe's death came from a sudden crisis tied to her chronic medical problems, not from an assault. When Arbuckle finally rose as the last witness, he spoke with the same calm honesty that had impressed the first jury. During closing arguments, McNabb went directly after Brady, questioning how he ever believed accusations from a complaining witness who had not witnessed anything at all. The jury left the room to deliberate on April 12th, and 6 minutes later, they returned. 5 of those minutes had been spent writing a formal apology to Arbuckle. Their foreman read it aloud, saying that acquittal was not enough and that a terrible injustice had been done to him. They wrote that there had not been the slightest proof connecting him to a crime. When the foreman finished reading, he handed the apology to Arbuckle, and then each juror stepped forward to shake his hand or embrace him. Even the alternates joined in. It was a moment that had never happened before in American legal history. Arbuckle kept that apology framed on his wall for the rest of his life. The jurors even posed proudly in photographs with him after the trial. One alternate, Christian Wold, said he knew an acquittal was coming as soon as the jury walked out. The apology became Arbuckle's proof that justice had finally spoken, even if the world outside the courtroom still carried the stain of gossip, rumors, and sensational headlines. Those 6 minutes of deliberation closed 6 long months of trials, but they could not repair the damage that came before. By April 1922, Arbuckle faced a financial collapse so severe that even victory felt hollow. His legal fees had crossed $700,000, equal to about $26,000 today. And every dollar he had ever earned during his years as Hollywood's highest-paid comedian was gone. He sold his house. He sold his cars. Then the court added a $500 fine for violating prohibition rules at the party. He walked out of court as an innocent man, but he was broke, battered, and carrying a reputation the public believed long before any jury ever looked at the truth. 6 days after his acquittal, on April 18, 1922, Hollywood delivered a blow even harsher than his trials. Will Hays, who headed the Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors of America, issued a lifetime ban that removed Arbuckle from every movie screen and every studio job. Theaters canceled his films immediately. It did not matter that a jury had taken 6 minutes to declare his innocence and 5 minutes to apologize to him. Public pressure was too loud, and Hays wanted to save the film industry from government censorship. He quietly lifted the ban in December 1922, but the damage was already locked in. Exhibitors refused to show Arbuckle's movies. Hollywood had its first canceled star and used him as a sacrifice to prove it knew how to police itself. The money he owed only grew heavier. His $3,000 Paramount contract from 1918, worth nearly $63,000 today, turned to dust. Paramount pulled Crazy to Marry from theaters and shelved Leap Year and The Fast Freight, releasing them only in Europe. Arbuckle sold his home, his cars, and whatever else he could part with. The $500 prohibition fine would not have mattered on its own, but together with everything else, it became one more reminder that innocence did not protect him from ruin. Through all of this, Minta Durfee stood by him. They had separated in 1921, long before the scandal, but she believed him when he said he had not harmed Virginia Rappe. She came to court day after day, even after gunshots were fired at her while she entered the courthouse. They divorced in January 1925, 4 years after the scandal first erupted, but her loyalty never faded. She spent the rest of her life defending his name, calling him the most generous person she had ever met, and insisting she would marry him again if she had the chance. Her devotion stood in sharp contrast to a Hollywood that had turned away from him the moment trouble arrived.